Hey guys, this is Lucas from Better Coding Academy, and in this video we are going to continue with our refactor of the components directory here, and more specifically we are going to be looking at the layouts directory over here. So we've got quite a few over here, and what we're going to try and do is just get rid of all of them and move them out into their relative directories where they belong. So let's start off with date filter input, and let's see what this uses here. So if I just do a quick search for that, you'll notice that we are using it inside of to-do filter, and this one is the same, so we've already moved that out, and we are not using it anywhere inside of the layouts. So it's already inside shared, which means that we don't really need date filter input in here anymore because nothing is using it, so we can just get rid of that, and it should still probably work just fine. So that seems to be fine, and we are going to go here, go to date input, and let's have a look and see where we are using date input. So let's do the same thing. And we might need to put a space before it just to check where we are importing it. We're only importing it in one place, which is inside to-do form. Now, this is a little bit confusing because it's only being used in one place. I kind of have to consider whether I want to keep it as a component like local to to-do form, or whether I want to keep it as a shared component. And I think based on the nature of date input, it does seem to be pretty generic. So I do think it is a good idea to keep it as a shared component here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into shared, and we're going to create a new file, call it date input, index.js like so, do date input like that, and then new file date input.js, and inside of here just paste in this part here. We're still using render date input, but then instead we can use the one inside of shared, so we can just do hash root components shared render date input like so. Maybe put that one on top so it maintains alphabetical order. So now we're not using this one anymore. Let's just check and see. So we've got it in one place. We can change that to shared, and we can move that down here, and we should be able to get rid of date input without any problems. So let's check that and make sure that it's still running and that we can still refresh this one over here. Yes, we can. So now let's go back into Visual Studio Code and deal with our loader. So our loader here imports css loader.css, which doesn't exist. I mean, it never existed, right? Because we were inside the layouts directory here, and so I think this was here, but then it was removed by the author in a previous commit or something. So let me just check and see if loader is being used at all, because this should give an error if, yeah, so it's not even being used at all, which is why we don't really get an error here. Otherwise we would. So I'm just going to remove that file straight away because we're not using it anywhere. That won't cause any problems. Navbar, let's have a look and see where navbar is being used. We've got navbar in a couple places, but all of these ones here all seem to reference this one and this one. Well, this one basically seems to reference the navbar inside of shared, so that means we're not using this one and we can get rid of it as well. So now progress bar here. Okay, so let's see where progress bar is being used. And we are using progress bar in to-do list, and that is the only place we are using it. So what we can do here is, this one's pretty simple. Progress bar, once again, is a very generic thing. So you can check in and also see that it is, ooh, that's not very good. Well, it should be very generic, but this one here is quite, yeah, see, this makes it really difficult. So let me explain what I mean here. We've got a progress bar, and you would expect a progress bar to be relatively generic. You'd expect it to be able to work under most circumstances. Oh, and we don't need this fragment there. So you'd expect it to work in most cases. However, with this code over here, what's actually happened is it's been bound to Redux, and we'll talk about Redux and whether or not this application should be using Redux in a later video. But you also notice that it basically is completely tied into to-dos, and whether the to-dos are being displayed or and whatnot. So it's being completely tied to that. So I would actually say that this component is not just a progress bar, but on top of that, it actually contains contextual knowledge. And for that reason, and because it's also only being used inside to-do lists, what I would actually do is I would actually suggest moving it inside of the to-do list component. So I would do progress bar like so, index.js, and do a progress bar like that, and I would grab this file here and I would paste it inside of there, and all of the imports are aliased or global, so that's fine, and I would change this line here to use /progress bar. And the only reason I'm doing that and not keeping it as a shared component, which I kind of regret having to put it inside of here, is because of its contextual design. But I don't really want to overcomplicate the refactoring process at this stage. I want to make sure that I keep it one step at a time. And with most projects like this, what you normally want to do when refactoring is you want to have have a test suite available with like 100% coverage, or at least as close to 100% as possible. And so then you'd run the test every single time to make sure that you're not breaking anything when you go through with each change that you make. But in this case, we're just going to keep it as a simple change, just move it over, keep it in there. And then in the future, maybe we can extract a progress bar and work on separating the logic there later on. But we're not going to do that here. So now I've got the progress bar inside of here. Progress bar over there shouldn't be used by anything else. So that seems to be fine. Nothing seems to be referencing this one here because that one's relative, so it seems to be fine. So that means we can get rid of progress bar here. So now for render date import, let's see where this is being used. Render date import like so. And we are using it inside of date filter import, which uses shared. We can make this a little bit longer. So we're using inside of shared here. This one's also the shared one, and we have one in layouts, which means that the one in layouts isn't being used at all, which means we can just directly get rid of it. So now for render error, let's see if we're using it anywhere. We've got render error in layouts. This one is also in layouts. Okay, this one's kind of weird. We will need to probably change that up, but we do have render error inside shared as well. And everything else seems to be referencing shared, except for text import here. So what I'm actually going to do in this case is I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to change these two to use the shared one instead. And then later on, when I refactor these ones out, then I can change that up as well, or I can just keep it. So now let's have a look here inside of radio, and let's just go to a new line here, and I would write hash root / component / shared. And because I already have render error here from a previous video, I don't need to change that anymore. I can just keep that there. I don't need to create that file, and I can just do the same thing with this one here. Today notification doesn't have it, so now I can just remove render error. Now for render radio, let's have a look and see where it's being used. Render radio is being used inside of the to-do form only. So a couple of things here. Number one, it is using render error like that, and it has error touched from the meta and the meta. Okay, so just one note on a bit of a tangent here is I would probably say that this form is pretty poorly designed. And the reason I would say that is because it doesn't really contain specific components. So like, for example, the radio button here automatically has an input tied to it. It has a label tied to it. It has certain classes tied to it. It has autocomplete tied to it for some reason. So the radio button doesn't really feel like a component, because like in the sense of something that can be reused and can be customizable. It does seem like something which is designed very specifically for add form and for the edit form for this to-do list. So what I would suggest to the author and to any of you watching is when you do have like, say for example, a radio button or a text field or an error message or something, try to keep it really generic. And a good way to do this is to look at stuff like, for example, a good example would be Twitter Bootstrap. So when you have something like Twitter Bootstrap, you'll notice that it contains a whole bunch of components. I'm using components in the way they're using it here. You'll notice that Twitter Bootstrap has individual components here, or in their case, because they obviously use a lot of CSS and it's mostly CSS driven, they have classes for each individual CSS component or like part of it. So like the text box would be one part, the label would be one part, and you would be able to kind of combine those into your own designs. But when you have something like this, where it's already giving you a certain label with a certain class name and an input with the same class name, which is also kind of weird, and then you have a value in there or in an error, and it's all kind of tied together, and it expects input meta type, which aren't really radio props, but they're more for Redux form. It just becomes very, very contextual, and it becomes very hard to reuse the component. So my suggestion to all of you watching is try to design your components as if you are trying to design, for example, a design framework or a design language. Even though you might not make yours public and you just keep it internal, it's still really, really nice to use in the future when you have to, say, for example, have a radio button under different circumstances, when you already have it designed, but you also keep it very flexible and easily manipulated by other parts of your code and easily reusable. So rant complete there. Let's keep going and let's move render radio into yeah, see, this makes it kind of hard. So like I was saying, I don't know whether to put it inside shared or whether to put it inside to-do formed or whether to keep it out inside shared. It's just really unclear because I can't tell from this, but I'm just going to keep it inside shared. And my suggestion would be to kind of refactor it and change it in a way so that it can be reusable. And I also don't really like the name of render radio because, I mean, what's the point of calling it render? Like, it doesn't have anything to do specifically with rendering. It's just, I guess, you're rendering it as a component. So I'm not really too sure about that one. I'm not too sure. I just think that maybe the naming there could be improved as well. So anyways, let's do render radio down here. This one should also use render text import, and we will fix that up in just a second. So now let's go get rid of render radio, and let's go render text import. Now let's move this one inside the shared as well. So render text import index.js, like so, and let's copy this and paste the file inside of there. Now let's see where we are using render text import. So render text import is used in quite a few places. We've got it here inside login. Login is right there. Okay, so what I would do here is I'd fix up quite a few things. Obviously, Redux form goes up there, React router DOM goes here, React Redux goes right there, React loader spinner goes there, and I'd do that. I'd change this one to hash root / actions like that. I'd change this to hash root / component / shared render text input. So instead of using layouts, I'd change the order of these. I'd save. Personally, one note here is I do like to use semicolons. Throughout this project, I've seen that like the use of semicolons has been kind of inconsistent across places. I personally do like it. I guess my main reason is like when you have, say for example, a return statement like that, and you have h1 down here, let's just have a look here, is that if you save this one actually puts a semicolon there. So like just like little errors like this and little things start to pop up without semicolons, I just think it's really nice to have. I like to have a semicolon at the end. That's just my preference, and I think that the majority of JavaScript devs would do the same. But I think the most important thing here is consistency across your app. So if you're going to stick with no semicolons, enforce it across every single file in all of your code. So that's what I would suggest here. So now after cleaning this one up, let's see where else we're using it. This one here uses shared, so that's good. Register would be the same thing. So I'd move these two down. I'd have React router DOM here. I'd have that there. I'd put this one as hash root / components / shared. And then I do hash root / actions like so. And then I should be able to, I think that's it. So shared, these two here are both using shared. That's fine. Okay, so now I should be able to remove render text import. Let's just do a quick check because I totally forgot. Make sure it's still kind of working. So that seems fine to me. And now for today notification. So let's have a look at this one here. Today notification we are using here, which is already using shared. So that's pretty cool. We've got it in layouts, but all of them are using shared. So what we can do is just straight away remove today notification, and with that we can remove the layouts directory. So now the final thing to do here, and it's quite important, is to go back into terminal and just restart the build process, because when using Webpack, and I'm not really too sure on Parcel here because I don't use Parcel as much as Webpack, but in Webpack in particular, is that it doesn't realize that you've deleted a file immediately. It kind of picks up on it sometimes, but it doesn't really work well when you delete like a whole directory. So it can be quite troublesome, especially when you kind of have files all around the place. So you think your app is still working, but it's not really working. So when you kind of delete stuff and do refactors, it is important to restart the watch process just to make sure that you are getting the latest stuff, or at least as close as possible. And you do see that after we did that, it is still working fine, which means that our refactor is most likely a success. But obviously it would be best when you refactor to have tests available just to make sure that everything is still working as expected. So that's all I've got for you in this video. So now you'll notice in the components directory, we have about, add to do, edit to do, home, login, register, and the shared directory, which contains all of our shared components here. So that's a lot cleaner in my opinion, because these ones all represent routes, and then the components that only they use are inside their respective directories, and they don't need to be outside. They're not really kind of bothering others, and it makes it really, really clear which components are using which. That's all I've got for you in this video. This has been Lucas with Better Coding Academy, and see you guys later.